Hey, hi everyone. I'm Aishwarya Jain from the peopleHum team. Before we begin, just a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We have received an overwhelming more than 2,700 registrations for this event, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the second panel discussion of the People Hum Dream Team series on Leaders Hum. Leaders Hum has grown to be a channel of choice for leadership thought and has collected a library of material and interviews conducted over time from some of the most well-known names in the industry. Today, we have the opportunity of welcoming the top global minds to our panel. Each one has multiple accolades, including books they've written or people and organizations they've worked with. We are here to discuss the theme of changes in work, leadership, and the workforce in these times of uncertainty, for which we have the Dream Team here with us today to share their thoughts and opinions. And now for introducing the Dream Team to you. First, we have Dorothy Dalton. Dorothy is a global talent management strategist. She's an influencer who focuses on the inclusivity of workplaces when it comes to a diverse workforce. She's also an established blogger who has published her guidebook on how to build an inclusive workplace. We also have with us Chester Elton. Chester is the #1 best-selling leadership author whose books have been translated to 30 different languages and have sold more than 1.5 million copies. And by the way, Chester's latest book, Leading with Gratitude, is also now available in India. We also have with us Deborah Rue. Deborah is an inclusion strategist and a global leader. She's worked with countries, UN agencies, national and multinational firms all over the world, helping them create strategies that fully include persons with disabilities. And lastly, we've got Adrian Gostick with us. Adrian is a top global leader in leadership and organizational culture, is a sought-after keynote speaker around the world. He's the New York Times best-selling author of The Carrot Principle and All In. I am also very thankful to our panel moderators today that include N. Sekar. Sekar is the COO of peopleHum and ex-head of engineering of SuccessFactors. We also have with us Paras Segal, who's the Senior Vice President of peopleHum. We're expecting a very spirited and engaging conversation with our panel. So without further ado, I would like to pass this on to Paras. Paras, over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here and in front of this panel. Some notes on how we are organized today. I have 5 topics for discussion to get started with each panel member, and others can jump in after the first response. We'll cover the 5 questions in 45 minutes and leave 10 minutes for questions we receive from the hundreds that are now online listening to us. For those attending, if you need to ask a question, please submit them via the chat channel. An instructions email was sent out to you for reference a couple of days ago. To the audience, we will also be conducting a flash poll before we take on the questions from the audience. So if you can help with your answer to the simple question being asked, that would be really helpful. So panelists, are we all set?
We're set.
Let's begin. Sekar, do you want to take this forward?
Sure. Thank you, Paras. My first question is for Deborah. Deborah, you have worked globally with organizations, governments, and agencies. The liberal societies of the Western cultures are built around the individuals, typically, and also the Eastern cultures where it's more hierarchical or slightly more authoritarian, and they're also built around the teams. What, in your opinion, are the concepts and leadership styles in different cultures, particularly in organizations, where you find that there are certain types of concepts and leadership styles that are applicable across all cultures, whether it's Western or Eastern? And then there'll be certain things that need to be customized for the Eastern culture versus the Western culture and so on. So what do you think are those styles that are global, and what are those that need to be customized for different cultures?
First of all, thank you so much for peopleHum for having me on another of your amazing webinars. I'm always very impressed with the content, so thank you. And I thought about this question a lot, so I appreciate you gave us some of these questions ahead of time, because it's a really big question. And I thought about it a lot, especially from the perspective of, I'm joining from Virginia in the United States today. And from the perspective of what's happening in the States right now with COVID-19, and you're right, we are very focused on individuality and individuals, and we're seeing problems with that right now during the COVID-19 virus. And I think the best leaders, regardless, the best leaders are the leaders that, and this is a silly thing to say, but considering I am joining from the United States, the best leaders are the ones that really think about it from a global perspective. Even if you're a national company, you've got to think about the global supply chain, the global people, what is right for the world. And so I think the best leaders are the ones that really do appreciate people as individuals, workers as individuals, leaders as individuals, but also understand that we are part of community. So I think you have to take both of those, the best of both the Eastern and the Western culture, and bring it together. And I think often in the Western culture, we were thinking we could add more value to the conversations over the, say, the last 50, 60, 75 years. And I think that what we've learned, at least what I've seen a lot of people learning in the Western, is that we really can learn a lot from the Eastern cultures. And I think it's got to be a blended solution. And a good leader is always somebody that wants to learn from their employees, from their customers, from their vendors, and really listen to what people are saying. And I know Chester's going to talk later about gratitude, but I think being grateful for what we have, for our team, for everything that people are going through, remembering the work-life balance, I think that is the sign of a really good leader. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that. I agree with Deborah on all those points. I think the essence of what she said for me is that good leaders listen. You know, they're very attentive. They listen to their customers, which, you know, we tend to do in business. Really extraordinary leaders listen to their employees. You know, they get their ideas. You know, we've had experience with a wonderful leader here in the States who runs a large restaurant chain called Texas Roadhouse. And, you know, he's got 70,000 employees. And the strength of Kent Taylor, his name is Kent Taylor, is that he listens to every manager of every restaurant. What's going on in your part of the country? What's going on in your community? Because, you know, here, particularly in the United States, it's such a diverse, as is India, right? You have so much diversity that if what works in New York is not going to work in Alabama or Florida, you know, and the same in India. What's good for Bangalore isn't necessarily going to work in Mumbai. So leaders, particularly that have large organizations, if they're not listening and if they're not attentive to their employees first and foremost, and then their customers and then their communities, they tend to think that I'm this solo genius, you know, that all goodness flows from me, whereas we know that that's absolutely not true. So this communal, you know, creating a culture where people's voices are heard, that they are listened to, become really vibrant corporations where you're free to experiment, you're free to innovate without fear. And that all starts with, are you listening?
How about you, Adrian? Do you want to add anything to this?
Well, I'd be happy to. You know, I think Deborah starts us off with you know, some really important thinking here, because you're right, there is this difference, and Chester and I, we've done surveys around the world of different perceptions about how you get people engaged in different cultures. And you're right, India is very different than China, is very different than Brazil, and very different than the US. What we're noticing is, though, in many of the cultures that we're beginning to study, is that, and I think Deborah's exactly right, is that in the Indian culture, for instance, a lot of the younger employees coming in want to be valued as individuals, whereas in the past it's been a collective. We're all a team, and they're saying, no, I want my voice heard, as Chester just said. And so we're seeing this little push and pull with millennials coming in, Gen Z coming in, and yet we still have a very traditional culture, as you know better than we do, the very traditional culture that says, no, we operate in a collective team. And so there is this little push and pull that's going on, not only in India, but around the world. which is really interesting. And then in the mix of this, you throw in COVID-19, where we're learning that individuality sometimes needs to be pulled back, and that there are times where the team needs to take precedence. And so it's a really interesting dynamic that we're having right now. And so, you know, coming to that idea of listening, though, that Chester just brought up, this is where actually the power of the individual can be very powerful, because without individual ideas, that's when great things happen. And so, as Chester was mentioning, Kent Taylor, who runs this 70,000 person organization here in the US, what he started doing when bad things, you know, when this started happening back in March, he says, I started calling my crazies. He says, because the people who follow the rules, they're not going to help you in a crisis. He says, they don't have the answers. They're paralyzed. He says, they're like puppies on a porch who are afraid to come off the porch. He says, so you call your crazies, they're already trying things. And it's interesting. So it's a really interesting push and pull we're having right now in the world with this idea of individuality versus team. And it's never a perfect dynamic. It's always going to be a delicate balance. But we've got to listen to the individual, and we've got to help them understand too the benefit of working for something bigger than them. And that's where mission and vision and values come in. That within this organization we're mentioning here, their goal during this past pandemic was to feed America. That's what they wanted to do. And so that became their mission, their rally cry. So all those things are very important as you think about, you know, that dynamic between individual and team.
Thank you, Adrian. Dorothy?
Yeah, I think the only final point that I might toss in is that we tend to be in cultural silos, most of us. And I quite often in multicultural environments, and I see potential train wrecks happening, particularly in communication, because people don't understand where the other person is coming from. So I think, to everyone's point, it's about listening, but it's also about asking the right questions to try and understand why that person behaves in a certain way, why they express themselves in this way. And I think globalization has been a help in breaking down some of these barriers. So I think it's an excellent question.
Thank you, Dorothy. Over to you, Aishwarya, for the next question.
Thanks, Edgar. Thanks to the panel for those wonderful insights too. The next question that I have, this one's for Chester. And you know, Chester, you're an expert in motivating leaders to try to be their best, to, you know, lead with gratitude as well. And you've talked about this, but a little more expansion. You know, there are different kinds of leadership styles, and you know, the ones that really come out are the employee centricity versus the stakeholder centricity ones. And one is driven by, you know, sheer compassion, and the other one is, you know, driven by efficiency and results. So what would be the benefits of adopting one versus the other? You know, employees do tend to select success over compassion at times. So do you believe that's true?
You know, I love this question because I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think you can have a very compassionate culture that delivers remarkable results. You know, in the research that Adrian and I did for our latest book, Leading with Gratitude, we were able to sit down and spend a good deal of time with a gentleman named Alan Mulally. Now, Alan Mulally is famous because during the last recession, he was the guy that saved the Ford Motor Company, this iconic brand in the States. And it was very interesting that central to everything he did was compassion for his employees. In fact, his first rule of management is love them up. You know, it's really funny to watch because you got to love them up, Chester. You got to love them up. It's all about your people. Love them up. And yet he is the most demanding and efficient manager you can imagine. He would set up these spreadsheets for all his leaders to meet every week. And it was a very simple system that if you were on track, it was green. If you were on track and yet not quite there, it was yellow. And if you were stuck, it was red. And he was very demanding of all his leaders, and at the same time found little ways to celebrate successes, to make sure that he put his people first and foremost, you know. And the proof of that was that when he took over at the Ford Motor Company, their engagement scores were like at 20%. When he left, it was over 90%. So I don't think these have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can enter into a very demanding, success-oriented culture and at the same time value your employees, have that compassion, and be grateful for the work that they do. So I think it's an excellent question in the sense that people often think it's either or, and it does not have to be that way. I'd be curious as to what Dorothy would have to say about that.
Well, I think that all research shows, in fact, that what I call putting the H into HR, the human element, and once you take care of your people, then they take care of the organization. So I think that all, in fact, when we come to my question, all the qualities that are showing to become increasingly important are top of mind at the moment. I heard a lovely phrase last week, which is the CEO is the chief empathy officer. And that really resonated with me, because I think we're seeing a switch to the command, from the command and control and straight on results, to backing off a bit, a different approach, and seeing that actually produces the same type of results.
Yeah, I might add too that in our latest book, we found quite a preponderance of, well, it's a minority, but it's still a big number of managers, about a third of managers who do lead by fear, exactly what you're asking here. And almost no managers think they lead by fear. They all think, no, I'm a driving manager. I'm a performance-oriented manager. Instead of what we're finding, and it comes back to Carol Dweck's work from Stanford, it's the growth mindset versus a performance mindset. And are we performance minded? Then that means we'll do some very subtle things to try and get people to perform. We'll say things like, look, if I can't guarantee people's jobs if we don't get this in on time, or we very subtly put fear into the workplace. A growth mindset really thinks about how we can think for the long term value for employees, for shareholders, for the communities, for our customers. Are we thinking long term? Are we really thinking about growing this organization? And so Chester's right, it's not one or the other, but it's really having a growth mindset and really helping our people grow and develop and do the right thing for the organization long term.
And I'll come in too, and great comments from everybody, Chester, Dorothy, and Adrian. I think, and I agree with everything you're saying. I just want to also remind leaders that the younger generations have different expectations than the older generations. And so if you want to be an employer of choice, now I understand we're saying this during the COVID-19 virus when 36 million Americans, for example, have lost jobs. We have an unemployment rate of 20% we've never seen. But at the same time, these things will correct themselves one way or the other. And so if you want to truly be an employer of choice and you want the talent, and we're, as Dorothy said earlier, we're globalized. So we seek to take talent from each other all over the world. And so it's very important that you can lead with fear. And I thought Adrian brought up some really good points, examples of how we subtly do that. But the younger generations won't work for you. And as what we're looking at as society and as customers, if you are treating your employees in a way that they are actually coming out and talking about you on social media, saying you're, well, I won't give that example because you'll know who I'm talking about, but if you're attacking your employer because you do not think they're doing the right thing by your employees, then others will not do business with you, and certainly you will not get the best talent. So this is not just you really need to do better as a leader. This is about survival in moving forward and going into whatever this new equilibrium is. But the fight for talent has not gone away. It's going to get even more interesting as we navigate through these times.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thanks, Chester. Thank you, Dorothy and Adrian. Decode, over to you.
Thank you, Aishwarya. It's interesting, we did talk about leading with fear. And also we did cite a couple of examples of leaders and so on. So this question is actually a slight shift in gear, because some of the leaders that we did talk about were men. So my next question is to Dorothy. Barack Obama once said, women are better leaders than men. And HBR obviously reinforced some of the same opinion in one of their studies. And in situation like this, we also see countries like Germany, New Zealand, which are led by women leaders, which seem to be doing better in handling this crisis than other countries. Now, what I would like to know about is what typical qualities do you see women display that are advantages to being a great leader? And what can men adopt and learn to be better leaders? And obviously, I would like to hear examples of more women leaders also in this conversation. Over to you, Dorothy.
It's a great question, and I'm glad I had it overnight so I could think about it, because I thought long and hard about whether or not I was going to agree with Barack Obama or disagree with him on a global podcast. So
Yes.
I'm going to reframe it, right? And I think in a way that you've already started to do that. I mean, you're very right that we're seeing quite a disparity between the way some women leaders have succeeded against some really poor male leaders. But having said that, we all know some bad women leaders, and we also know great male leaders, and there are some men who are doing a great job as well. So I think it's a question of moving away from gender stereotypes, because women are raised to be listeners, caring, supportive, collaborative, nurturing, you know, all of these soft skills, whereas men have been raised to be aggressive or assertive, risk-taking, hide their emotions, all of these sort of things. And I think what this crisis has done is shown that it's time to move on, and that there is a different style of leadership that can be effective. But they're not, I hate the word female skills, male skills. I much prefer that they're just effective skills or power skill, whatever you want to call them. And men and women can exhibit them equally. And I think Barack Obama, I think for me, came over to me as someone who is not American, as a very compassionate and caring leader. I mean, we saw him cry very publicly. I was thinking of the Sandy Hook news announcement when he was announcing that. So he came over as a very caring leader. There are lots of men doing excellent jobs as well. So I think it's about, and Gloria Steinem said this, we need to stop teaching our daughters to be like our sons and raising our sons to be like our daughters. And I think somewhere in the middle that we will get this range of skills that both men and women can employ without fear of pushback. And I think that that's really important, because particularly in the workplace, if women are assertive, they're considered to be aggressive or a bitch. If they're passionate, they're emotional. If they negotiate, they're pushy. And conversely, we hear things being told to men, you know, man up, grow a pair, you know, all of this sort of thing, and it's not helpful. So I would like very much to move away from that and just focus on soft skills as being key to the next level of leadership, or leadership in the next normal. So I don't know what the others think of that.
I agree with everything Dorothy said. But I will say, one reason why I think we do have to have these conversations is because women are still not being included in leadership skills. We still are only being included on boards at 30%. We are still being paid. We are losing billions of dollars every single year due to pay disparity. We are not being included equally. So I want the world to be like Dorothy is saying. I want it to be like that. And I think we absolutely have to be considerate of all those things she said, but women are still being left behind. We are not being paid the same. We included. We are not being CEOs. We are not being invited to the board. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think there are a lot of cultural reasons, but unfortunately, we still do need to have these conversations. Are women better leaders? Well, not necessarily, because as Dorothy said, there's a lot of different things that come in to be a leader, but we still have to have these conversations, because the reality is we still are not being included the way we should be included. And there are some amazing women leaders. I really like Sheryl Sandberg, and I like the points that she was making. I'm a huge, huge fan of Michelle Obama. When they go high, we go, when they go low, we go high. And Angela Merkel. I love these really strong leaders. And I think the reason why we have to keep having these conversations is because the reality are still leadership positions. We are still being seen as, you know, oh, they're so collaborative, but we're not being taken seriously in the workforce. We're still not. The numbers tell us this over and over and over again. So I'm afraid to stop talking about this, because I believe that if I do a good job, I should be paid equally or maybe better than man. Just kidding. But I do think we should bring equality into this. I just think that's it is ridiculous. And I believe, once again, the younger generation aren't going to put up with us telling the women to go and sit down and be quiet. And we need to pay more men more money because they have families. So, sorry.
Can I just hop in again there? I think one of the things that is worth tagging on here is that currently we place too high a value on what I would call male-coded qualities. So, and I think, to Deborah's excellent point, that seeing that we know that the wider effective skills are working, then we need to give them the same level of recognition in terms of representation, pay, and all the other things. So I just want to tag that onto Deborah's point.
Yeah, you know, you had asked Paris about examples of great women leaders. And I think that's one thing that Chester and I, in our work, we always bring in examples. One of the best leaders we've ever studied is a woman named Doria Camaraza, who runs one of the big divisions for American Express, has probably 10,000 employees throughout South America, and she handles all the call centers. And Chester and I went and spent a couple of days with Doria and her team in Florida, and it was really remarkable, wasn't it, Chester, how amazing her leadership style is? Because you're exactly right. There are some, it doesn't really matter if you're a man or a woman, it's the leadership style you bring. Doria is tremendously empathetic. At this point, when we met her, she probably had 3,000 employees, knew everybody's name, knew most of their stories. I mean that kind of leadership, and people would say, who does that? What kind of leader actually knows their people like that? We were in a conference room with her, I think 8 top leaders. And remember this, Chester, we were writing up on a board everything they were doing for recognition for their employees. We must have filled, you know, those big flip charts, I don't know, 10 of them, with all the things they were doing for their people. And so it doesn't matter if it's a male or a female trait, it's, do you care about your people? And she does. And she's not only been promoted numerous times within American Express, but she has the loyalty of her people because she cares about her people first and her customers second. And because of that, her employees take care of her customers. They've been, you know, 10 years in a row, #1 for J.D. Power and Associates, #1 in customer satisfaction, because she takes care of her employees first.
Yeah, the issue here is, you know, where's the talent? Whether you're a man or a woman, where's the talent? And what kind of talent do you need to lead a particular organization? You know, and having said that, I mean, we're very good about saying, look, these generations are different, these cultures are different, and so on. And you have to take into account that men and women are different. You know, there are different issues depending on their circumstance. As you would say, look, you've got a man that's a single parent, he's got 3 kids at home. You've got a woman that's a single parent, she got 3 kids at home. You are going to make some adjustments for that talent because it's the talent that you need for that group at that time. So yeah, I don't think you can be blind to cultural differences or generational differences, and you can't be blind to gender differences. What you're looking for is who's the best person for the job. If they happen to be a man, if they happen to be a woman, that shouldn't enter into it. You know, what is the leadership style? You know, you talk about, you know, hard driving men and so on. But one of my favorite characters in history is Margaret Thatcher, you know, who came out and said, they call me the Iron Lady. And they're right. You know, I mean, there was nobody that was more, you know, rigid than Margaret Thatcher. So again, look at the talent, look at the need. And then if there are adjustments you need to make, then you make those adjustments, you know, just driven by the situation. And I know I'm babbling here a little bit because as an older white male, this is sort of the third rail subject. I'm really afraid that no matter what I say, it's going to be wrong. So I'll leave it at that. Let the best talent win.
To hop in real quick, I just think when you make that decision, you have to make sure you're not doing it through the lens of bias. And
Exactly. I would agree with
certainly
that.
that if you have a single dad with 3 kids, and I've observed this, it's, oh, poor guy. And then if it's a single mum with 3 kids, it's, well, she needs to get her act together and, you know, prove that she's up to standard. So I think that in a neutral sense, if you take away all biases, then I think that's a valid point.
Yeah, my point is just boil it down to the talent. You know,
Yes.
and you make exceptions for talent. You've got a great talent who lives in London who doesn't want to move to New York. You'll make that adjustment if the talent is what you need. And so that's really my point. Regardless of gender, you know, what is it that you need? Where is the talent? Go get the talent.
Thank you all. That's a very, very interesting conversation there. I know it was not an often discussed topic, and it is also a slightly sensitive topic. So I really, really appreciate all your candid views in that. Over to you, Aishwarya, for the next question.
Thank you so much, Sekhar. So I'm going to shift the talk a little bit, towards the current times and how we can cope with it as leaders. So the next question I have is for Adrian. So Adrian, in these uncertain times, there's just a lot of talk about resilience, right? The talk has, really shifted towards resilience, and especially as leaders, as young leaders and leaders that already have so much experience. Now everybody has to suddenly build so much resilience into their organizations, their culture. So how do you think they could, really go about doing that?
It's a great question because, from what I'm seeing around the world, I just saw some stats a couple of days ago saying that I think 68% of Italy right now is saying they feel anxiety, depression, and bordering on mental illness. I mean, that's a huge number where we've never seen anything like that before. Now, of course, what happened in Italy with COVID-19 is, but around the world, we are seeing huge numbers of people with anxiety, with depression, with mental illnesses coming in who've in many cases have never had them before. And a lot of managers will say, yeah, well, they should go talk to a therapist. And that's really not an answer if they're coming to you. Yeah, it's like a friend coming to you saying, boy, I've got some real problems. And you say, yeah, go talk to somebody else. That's not healthy. Now, I'm not saying a manager should be a therapist. That's never a good idea. But a manager should be a listening voice. A manager should be the first person that I should turn to if I'm having challenges. And a lot of this stress is coming from work because, as Deborah mentioned, here in the US, we've got 20% unemployment. We've never seen anything like that in our lifetimes. Our parents' lifetimes, we've never seen that. And so this is unprecedented. And there's a lot of fear out there, not only fear of economic, fear of my job, fear of will I be sick? Will my grandmother get sick, etc. There's a lot of fear out there. And so when people are coming to you as a manager and they're expressing their fear, the worst thing we can do is just push them away and say, go talk to somebody else. We have a phone number you should call. That's not how you create a relationship. You create a relationship by, tell me what you're feeling. Let's see what I can do to help. Because there actually is a lot that a manager can do to help build up the resilience of their people. They can give them some flexibility. They can give them a voice, as we talked about earlier. There's a lot of things that a manager can do to help. If Dorothy mentioned earlier, we are that chief empathy officer, that we are listening and caring. It doesn't mean that there aren't times when a therapist is needed. But what we have to realize as managers is that we have to be a lot more listening and caring and compassionate than we've ever been, especially for the next couple of years as we continue to go through this process.
Absolutely. Deborah, what do you think?
Well, I think his answer was brilliant. So I definitely need to get the book that they wrote. But I totally agree. And I think also what is interesting about this is some of us that before were very resilient, and we were always the people that people came to, came to our teams, our friends, or because we just seem to be more resilient. I see those people really starting to struggle now, and I see it on my own team. And I see, and in a way, when you're one of those people, and I'm one of those people, I'm very empathetic, I'm very compassionate, I want to help. You can get overwhelmed, and I'm starting to see us get overwhelmed, and just the fear of how long is this going to go on. I heard on, I'm trying not to listen to the news, but I heard on the news the other day that that 50% of small businesses in the United States will fail in the next 6 months. Well, small business is the backbone of the United States, so things like that are terrifying. You know, what happens to the gig economy, but it's just going on and on and on. And also, since we don't know who has it, and you know, all the fears of, my sister said to me one time, I feel like, you know, this silent monster is walking around and we don't know where it is. And it's the ongoing fear like we've never seen before, as Adrian said. And I think this is the time when we really need to look to the Adrians and the Chesters that are giving us good advice on how do we stay mentally healthy during these intense times. How do we reach out to not only our employees, we're talking about leadership here, to make sure they're okay, but I think it's going to take different techniques. And I'll just give you an example. I'm a little bit high strung myself. I know that I need to meditate more, and I sometimes struggle because I'm just too much to do. But I've realized in these times, I have to eat better. I have to be very deliberate about my hydration, about my exercise. I have to take time to meditate twice a day now, I'm seeing. So I just think it's the ongoingness of this and the unknowns and the fears and some of our leaders, you know, making things even worse. So I just think that's part of the conversation that we have to be aware of, because it's just taking, we don't know what to expect from this, how long it's going to go on.
Yeah. Chester, are you also seeing that leaders who were fearless before are suddenly crumbling down?
Well, I think what's happening is people are just getting worn out. You know, we're good at dealing with events, you know, a hurricane, a tsunami, even a terrorist attack, because there's sort of this event, it happens and then we recover. You know, we can be resilient in short periods of time. This thing where no one knows when it's going to end, the cycle, I mean, it just wears you down. And I hope that it does shine a light more on, you know, mental health. As Adrian was saying, you know, we've done some research on this, and isn't it interesting that if you called in and said, you know, I sprained my ankle, I won't be in today, people say that's fine. Or I've got the flu, I'll be out for a couple of days, that's fine. You call up and say, hey, I need a couple of mental health days, and you go, whoa, you know, buck up. I remember early in my career, you know, and I grew up in sales, had a lot of things going on, took a lot of extra assignments, and I was mentally exhausted. And I'll never forget, the head of HR and I were good friends. She said, would you like some counseling? And I said, absolutely not. She said, why? I said, I don't ever want that in my employee folder that Chester had to go for counseling, because it was a sign of weakness, right? There was like literally, there was no way. Like she said, here's the number. I said, I'm not writing it down. That was old school. Well, I think now with this prolonged virus, where people, it really is evident that people are, you know, just psychologically and mentally exhausted, that hopefully this will become no different than, I was out running, I sprained my ankle, I need a couple of days, to say, you know what, I'm just mentally exhausted, I need a couple of days, and I'm going to go talk to the counselor. And people go, you know what, instead of saying buck up, they'll say, you know what, good for you, I've done that, and it was good for me too. And as soon as the leaders admit that they have done it and that it was okay, it gives everybody else permission to do the same. So I think this stigma around mental health, you know, is hopefully going to be lifted. And the answer isn't going to be, as like Adrian said, well, you know, there's an app, you can download this meditation app, and I think that'll take care of everything for you. You know, or do it after hours. You know, don't do it during business. Do it after hours. It'll be more acceptable, and we will get a more transparent and a healthier and a better culture when people can talk about those things without fear of being stigmatized. But Dorothy, you've got that all-knowing look on your face. I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
I think it's really important to give ourselves permission to be fearful. I think because there are things to be fearful of. I think it's important to feel vulnerable. And certainly one of the things I'm working with my clients is that people are, I mean, they have every sort of anxiety, but remote working, people are feeling a lot of isolation. So I think it's down to managers really to be more inclusive and the way they handle their staff. So, you know, how are you doing today? And someone says, I'm fine. Well, you're not fine. Nobody's fine. So maybe managers start drilling down to finding out what is behind the fine, and to say we're all worried, we're all nervous and scared. And I think it's bringing that out in the open will help a lot.
Yeah, to be afraid is okay. You know,
Yeah.
I love the old line that says, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me.
Yeah.
You know, you can give your permission, you can give yourself permission to be afraid. You can give yourself permission to mourn and to take a day off. And I think that's really healthy, as long as in your culture it's accepted, as long as you're not stigmatized, because that stigma can cause you to really push it down, and that's, we all know, is not healthy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those wonderful answers, panel. Over to you, Sekar.
Thank you, Aishwarya. My next question is for Chester. Chester, in your latest book with Adrian, Leading with Gratitude, you frequently talk about giving praise, giving praise frequently and immediately. On the other hand, leaders are also expected to provide constructive feedback frequently and immediately. How do you balance both? On the one hand, you have to say, hey, thank you very much for doing this, and this is what you need to improve. How do you balance both of these?
Yeah, I think it's actually it's a lot easier than leaders think. First off, thank you for mentioning the book. It's now available in India. It makes a great gift for weddings and so on. So put that on your list. Birthdays, what I love about it is that we think of feedback, and in that context, even the way you phrased that question, that feedback is somehow negative. That feedback means you need to be corrected. Well, we can give feedback that's very positive, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem with a lot of leaders is that it's an either or, when it can all be part of the same leadership style. We've got a wonderful leader, for example, that he's created a certain intentionality and discipline around praise. And he puts 10 coins in his left pocket, and he sets a goal to have 10 positive interactions with his people every day. We say, well, that's too much. Well, he's got a lot of people he manages. See, what he's doing is he's making sure that his people, when he shows up, that they know that he's appreciative for what they do every day to keep the doors open, right? So that when he's got to have that feedback conversation where, look, some corrective behavior, he's got a lot of goodwill in the bank already. Often we find, and this is particularly with new leaders, they have this feeling that they've got to be right about everything all the time. And so the reason they got promoted is because they've got great ideas, and their great ideas are correcting everybody else whose ideas aren't as good as theirs, right? So I'm coming in every day and say, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong. In fact, I'm going to have name tags made up. Mine's going to say, I do everything right. Your name tag is going to say, you do everything wrong. And every time I show up, I'm hitting people over the head with a stick. Well, if you have a culture of gratitude, if you've got a culture of that becomes even peer-to-peer, you celebrate these little victories along the way. You appreciate all the little things that are going well every day, so that when people make mistakes, they are open to your coaching, right? It's not one of these things where, Paris, I got some feedback for you, and immediately you go, can I talk to you for a minute, Paris? When a manager comes up and says, hey, I want to talk to you for a minute, we never think, oh, that's going to be good news. There's going to be balloons. There's going to be a cake. So you've got to temper that and say, look, I really appreciate all of the good things you do all the time. Look, you need to be doing this better. Let me coach you up on that. And so it doesn't come across as punitive. It comes across as helpful. So feedback has to be both positive and corrective. And the ratio, however, has to be overwhelmingly positive to negative, because we know that a negative, experience outweighs. I mean, just look on Amazon, right? One star review, you need 20 to offset the one, right? So think about what your ratio is. Harvard Business School did a study, said it's at least 5 to 1. So I think as leaders, you've got to ask yourself, what is my ratio of positive to negative? And if it's about 1 to 1, that's a very negative culture. If it's at least 5 to 1, now you've got people that will bring problems to you that you can solve, people that are open to your coaching. And I'm babbling now, but I'd love to hear what Deborah has to say on this as well. How do you create that positive culture where feedback isn't a negative thing?
I love listening to Chester. I just sort of, the wisdom is just so amazing. I totally agree with what you said, Chester. And one thing that I'm finding, especially during this time of crisis, I find that we all make mistakes, but what I'm finding, and I know that I do this myself, and I know my team members do this, if I make a mistake, I'm so much harder on myself than any manager is going to be to me. And with my employees, I see the same thing. One of my employees perceived that he made a mistake and that I felt he made a mistake recently. And I actually did not think that he made a mistake, but I could tell that he thought I made blah, 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 right? And so as a manager, you know something's going on. And so I went to him and I said, I know you think you did this wrong. I do. I feel really guilty about it. I said, but I don't know, you're going to have to work on that because I do not perceive that you did make a mistake. I actually think that because that happened, I was able to do this. And I think we're much stronger as a team and a company because we were able to talk about these things. But I think as leaders, we need to realize that often the employee's going to be much harder on themselves if they perceive they made a mistake and they think you think they made a mistake than you could be. So I love what Chester said about the positive ratio to the negative, because at some point, I really care about my team members. I just think I have an amazing team. And many of my team members are technologists with disabilities too. Very proud of these amazing, talented people, but they're hard on themselves because they're such perfectionists and they care so much about the work that we're doing. They want to have this major social impact. And so I have to remember that they're going to be so much harder on themselves. And what's the goal? What's the goal? A mistake supposedly was made, or maybe was made, but can we learn from that and move forward without damaging people's self-esteem? And then, of course, before I turn the mic over, to someone else, once again, what we're walking is so intense and so long and so fearful that everything that we did before, we have to do a little bit more diligently now, just because once again, we're having losses, we're experiencing losses, we're losing parents, grandparents, friends, we're having suicide losses like we've never seen. There's just so much really scary things happening right now. And as leaders, we need to realize that if a mistake was made, what can we learn from that? How can we grow from that? Because I have grown the most, I should say, because of my mistakes, and I've made a lot of them. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, I'll
Thank you,
add too
Deborah.
that a lot of the sort of the senior leaders we work with now, I think Deborah's exactly right. They're not calling them mistakes, they're calling them learning opportunities. So your employee comes in and says, "Oh, I think I've made a mistake," and the boss will go, "Terrific! What can we learn from this?" We were sitting on a call with one of our clients the other day, and their computer system had gone down over the weekend, and it cost them millions of dollars. And as we joined the call, we were listening in, and it's one of our consulting clients. We were listening in, and the COO said, "Look, before we begin," we said, "we know the computer system went down over the weekend. We know it cost us money." He says, "There's no point in belaboring that. I want us to have a positive conversation. I want to think about what we can do going forward to make sure that we learn from this, and that next time we're in a better spot." And then sort of the CIO came on, whose computer system it was, but it had been over Mother's Day. He didn't have people on call because it's never happened before. Everybody could have been piling on the CIO, but they weren't. They were all saying, "Well, why don't we do this and this?" And it was a great conversation. And it was really positive to hear that. And so, as Chester mentioned earlier, there's ways to make feedback very positive, to say, how can we learn? How can we go forward? Because the last thing you want to do is a mistake happens in your team or your organization, and nobody tells you about it because they're fearful of what happens. I don't want to be the bad guy. You know, Chester and I once saw a leader have to apologize in front of the team, right, Jess, for a mistake that had happened. And as we were kind of sitting there thinking, nobody is ever going to take a risk here again. This is it. It's done. Because this, you know, so you've got to create a way to make feedback a really positive thing. Dorothy, what would you add?
I mean, I think they're all great answers, and I would include all of that. I think I just sort of add a final point is that one of the pillars of an inclusive workplace is receiving recognition frequently, regularly, so that getting the feedback isn't, you know, a sort of honey, we need to talk situation. So it's on a regular basis. And the other thing about inclusive workplaces is that people are not afraid to make mistakes. So I think that if the leaders have created that culture, it goes a long way to mitigating that feeling of isolation or fear. But I thought everybody gave wonderful answers.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you all. Over to you, Paras.
Thanks, Eka. Thank you so much for the insightful conversation, panelists. We would now take the questions from the audience, but before that, let us launch a quick poll to hear from our audience as to what they have got to say about that. So as we launch the poll, I would like to ask the panelists if we can spend like 10 more minutes to get to some of these questions through a bit. I guess all of us need help, and there are many questions which are coming through. And we do have a lot of questions, but being cognizant of everyone's time, we will take about 5 to 6 questions in front of you as received from the audience. So we close the poll. We share the results.
Learning.
And go back to our questions. The first question is for Deborah, and this is from Mary Wilson. So the question for you, Deborah, is do you find that women need sponsors, champions, or mentors to get ahead?
Great question, and I do. I think it's very important for everybody to have mentors and guides along the way. And I know I have, and I'm an older woman. I'm in 61 these days, so that's why I have purple instead of just gray. May as well have fun. But as you know, women were just really coming into the workforce in the 70s and 80s, and women were acting more like they thought men were acting. And so I found when I was a young woman that I couldn't really find good mentors that were women. Most of my mentors were men. And so as I went through my journey, I wanted to make that better, and I really made an effort. I still make a deliberate effort to mentor women, especially young women, and men too. I also do a lot of mentoring of all kind of, all people of different ages, different capabilities. But I think it's really important for women to do that. And you need to surround yourself with mentors, just answering the question. I think both women and men. And you can tell if somebody really wants to be there and help you grow. You can by the way they're responding to you, the time that they're taking with you, the way they're responding to your questions, you can tell a mentor very quickly. And I think I always learn so much also from the people I'm mentoring. So I think it's important for leaders to realize it goes both ways, because I've learned some of my biggest lessons from the young people that I talk to every day. I know that you have I'm going to say her name wrong, Aishwarya on, and I just butchered her name, but she's a perfect example. I've really enjoyed getting to know her. She's very smart, she's very clever, and she's taught me some things. So I think, yes, you need the mentors, but find mentors that will appreciate what you're bringing to the table too. And I apologize for butchering your name just then.
Thank you, Deborah. Jyoti, would you like to add to that anything in that question?
I think research shows that women actually are under-sponsored, and one of the reasons for this is just basic maths. To have a door opener, you need to have someone at a senior level. And to Deborah's point earlier in the session, with so few men at a senior level, it's hard for women to find them. So I always make sure that the senior male leaders that I work with have, if you like, a cohort of women that they can encourage and introduce and make sure that they have opportunities. So look for a sponsor as well as a mentor. That would be my add-on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we go over to the next question, and this is for Adrian, and this is from Manisa. So the question for you, Adrian, is how do you motivate employees to do their best to sustain business at the same time having compassion to their fears and uncertainty?
It's a great question. You know, how are we motivating people in this time? What we're finding is, and Chester and I, we working with a team of psychologists, we put together what's called the Motivators Assessment. And more than 80,000 people have taken this around the world. And it really spits out from 1 to 23 what you're motivated by. Because what we tend to do as managers is we tend to assume everybody's the same. Everybody's motivated by achieving, or everybody's motivated by working together as a team. And no, we're all very different. The chances of Dorothy and I having the same top 5 of those 23 motivators in common is more than 1,000,000 to 1. What we're finding is we are very unique. And so this comes back to our original conversation about the team versus the individual. Yeah, the team is how we all work together and we have this noble cause and we're all charging together. But I manage people very differently based on what they're motivated by. If I know Chester is, one of his strongest motivators is friendship and teamwork, I will send him probably to a networking conference, or now it'll be a Zoom conference, to meet lots of people. And he loves that. Every day he wants to be meeting new people and connecting. Chester is a perfect connector. Me, I'm driven by ideas like autonomy and creativity. I want to be working in my office and thinking of the next big idea and crunching stuff. We're both very productive, and this is one reason we're great team members, is we have different skills. And so really when it comes down to motivating people, especially during a crisis, we can't just assume that everybody, you know, will understand, we've all got to work hard. No, you've still got to motivate people in a way that, especially in these times, that will make them feel like you care about them as an individual, and you're finding ways to really spark their own passion and their own ways of working that will make them feel the most engaged.
Interesting, thank you. Back to you, Dorothy. Like, what is your take on this?
I mean, to be honest, I've got nothing to add to that. I think you have to find out what each individual driver is and tap into that. And absolutely not treat everyone the same and respect differences and not belittle one driver against another. So I think Adrian gave the perfect answer and I can't add anything else.
Okay.
I would just like to add that, you know,
Whoa, she just said it was the perfect answer. Now you're trying to add it?
Well, I just wanted to point out that, you know, Adrian did talk about our differences. I often think, man, this COVID virus thing, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to Adrian ever. You know, he doesn't have to go to the airport. He doesn't have to travel. Whereas I'm one of those guys that actually misses the airport. So yeah, we are very different. And that's why we work together so well. My wife had a great line. She said, introverts, you need to call your extrovert friends. They have no idea how to do this COVID thing.
Yeah, that is true. I'm with you, Chester, on that.
Okay. So over to the next question, and this one is for you, Chester. And this is coming from Shivinder. So the question is, what do you recommend to the graduating batch of 2020 for keeping the faith and to get the few jobs that will be available in a severe economic downturn that we are facing? What skills do you think will be relevant in the post-pandemic scenario?
You know, really a great question. My son just graduated with a dual master's from the University of Pittsburgh, and in a program, get this, that has had over the last 10 years, 100% placement. And his is the first class where they do not have 100% placement. And he's one of those, and he's struggling with it. You know, as much as we can do, it's just really an unusual time. So the number one trait that LinkedIn is looking for in new hires right now, interestingly enough, is creativity. Isn't that interesting? That while AI is taking a lot of jobs and so on, what AI really struggles with is creativity. Right now, employers, and Adrian mentioned it with our restaurant owner, Ken Taylor, they're looking for people that have creative answers and creative solutions to new problems. So feed that creativity, look to be innovative and creative. And I think not only does that make you more appealing to potential employers, it keeps your energy up. Being creative and looking for new ideas and reading more and creating a bigger circle of creative friends that are very diverse. And as we see right here, I mean, on a Zoom call, you can bring people in from all over the world. Find those groups and get involved in those groups and network and really focus on that creativity. What are the new and different ways? Because as I mentioned, and I can't emphasize this enough, it has a dual purpose. It makes you more appealing to employers, and I think it keeps your personal energy high. So those are that would be my answer to that question.
Thanks, Chester. Thanks, Chester. So moving on to the next question, and this one is for Dorothy. And Dorothy, this question is from Jayashree. So the question is, rich established organizations are these days granting work from home till December, but startups cannot really survive in that mode. What advice would you give to startups, their leaders, and their HR at this point in time?
To be honest, I'm not sure that this is my area of expertise. I don't know, is anybody, do Chester and Adrian, are you, Deborah, this is more for you, I think.
Well, I'm a small business owner, and have been for many years. And before that, I was in the banking industry. I was in the financial industry and what we call corporate America. And it's very interesting right now as small businesses, and we are still in a gig economy all over the world. And of course, I mentioned earlier some of the dire predictions of all of the small businesses that are going to fail. But I still think it sort of goes back to all the conversation we've been having along the way. It's, you have to really think about what your purpose is. And I liked the point that Chester was making about, creativeness, because I agree with that. Because what I'm looking for with my team is I want to make sure that I have a lot of inclusivity. I want different cultures. I want different genders. I want all the different diversities represented, because we know that diversity equals innovation and creativity. And so I think the opportunity and the really scary times that we have as business owners, and let me just say that I created two businesses. I created a first business earlier I was talking about mistakes, but my first business was called Tech Access. And it was a technology firm that focused on making sure everything is accessible. We need tech for all. We need tech for good. We need digital inclusion. We also need to include everyone, and that means including people with disabilities. Most of my clients have 5 generations in their workforce. So this is also about all the generations and all the differences. So I think during these really intense times, you have to take a look at, and it was interesting as we were listening to Chester and Adrian go back and forth about what they bring to the table. And that is what adds value to even our small organizations too, is the way we go, the differences in the way we handle problems and we look at situations. And so the reality is some businesses are just going to fail because the large corporations or the large entities that would normally give us business are tightening up, and we know this is going to happen. But I think even in the failures, we need to take a look and say, well, what does that mean? How has the world changed? And how do I wish the world has changed? For example, I also really care so much about climate and climate activism and climate change and climate action. And so a lot of the work that we're doing, we're looking at what other big problems do we see in the world that we could add value to the conversations. And so I think if a small business or an entrepreneur is not out on social media, adding to the conversations, being on webinars, writing blogs, writing books, I mean, there's so many ways that we can contribute to the conversations, even if after it's all said and done, our businesses fail. Because my first business, Tech Access, it failed during the last financial crisis. The financial crisis was 2008 to 2009, and it all is how we spin things too, right? Because I also could say it didn't fail because it was actually absorbed by another company. So it sort of depends on how you're doing it. But with that, not failure, but my business was forced to make a decision to merge with another company because the bank we were with failed. It was not my fault, the bank failed, but I had to deal with it. And so I think that we have to look at what we can learn from the situation, even if we fail, and how do we pick up the failures and learn so much from it and then contribute in other ways. But there's not an easy answer. There's not, but I think we have to keep looking at life is a journey. We're supposed to. I learned so much with when Tech Access had that failure. And what I learned was I always trust myself now. I always, if I'm hurting at my heart or in my stomach and my intuition is saying, don't, I will not do it. So I completely lead now, listening to my intuition and my gut. I learned that from that talk I had when my business failed, even though I protected all my employees. A lot of people lost money. I lost the most, but it's just part of the journey. So take the time to try to appreciate the journey, including the failures along the way.
Interesting take. Thanks for that, Deborah. So we go over to the next question, Dorothy, again for you.
Okay, back to me. Okay, hope I can answer it this time. Good job.
Yeah. So the question that we have for you, Dorothy, is from Jeffrey. And the question really is that, work from home requires a lot of self-discipline. And it's difficult to approach strategic initiatives and innovation in a work from home scenario. How can organizations balance the tactical versus the strategic imperatives? What's your take on that? Yep.
Well, I think at the moment we're not working from home, are we? We're coping from home, so that everybody is just managing and doing what they can do. So I think that certainly for leaders, this sort of encapsulates everything we've said. It's about understanding and what's going on for people. And I feel I'm so glad my kids are not in education, that they're out of school, that I don't have kids at home. They call it co-spacing, where you're working around the kitchen table with your kids and your partner. I think the pressures are enormous. So everything we've said about finding out what's going, listening, asking questions, not making assumptions, and trusting in your people to deliver it and managing expectation. And I think that for those that everybody's under pressure, so everything that Deborah said about managing your own stress levels, all of these things are really, really important. And then sitting down with your people and saying, okay, this is what's going on for you, this is what's going on for me, how can we make this work, given that you're in one town, I'm in another, you've got 4 kids, I've got 2 kids, and a sick grandmother and all the rest of it. So it's a very unusual set of circumstances at the moment. And I think there will be massive lessons going forward about how to do stuff and how not to do stuff. And certainly from the people that I work with, it's not about the tech. I mean, I've seen people with cell phones hanging out their window, trying to work, but because the boss has been so great and understanding and empathetic, they really didn't care. So it's about all the qualities we spoke about, the affective skills, the soft skills. At the moment, they're the most important thing. And then the strategy will come, because it was Drucker that said, right, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I mean, that really applies.
Wonderful. Jessa, what's your take on that?
The discipline there, I think, is really the key. Pre-COVID, you had a commute where you could kind of separate yourself from work as you came home. Now your commute is you walk through the door. It's immediate, and it's so easy to walk back through that door. Oh, I forgot one thing. In the research we did for our book, Adrian and I had a lot of fun talking about take it home. Don't leave your best self at work. We're working so hard and we're trying to take care of everybody at work, and then we walk through the door and we're exhausted. Make sure you take that gratitude and those leadership best practices home. we put at the end of the book a baker's dozen of 13 things you can do. And one of the things that Adrian came up with that I really loved is, when you see your family, be happy to see them. Like, that's a good start. Like, hey, I'm done for the day. How you guys doing? Let's have some fun, as opposed to, you can't believe how exhausted I am, So, bring your best self home as well. And I think that's part of the discipline. My wife is really good when it comes time for us to have a meal. She says, you have to leave your phone in your office, because I know as soon as that thing vibrates, you're going to grab it and I'm going to lose you. So, set up certain rules around, when I'm at work, I do this. When I walk through the door, I do this. And I think that's really very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for that take. Aishwarya, over to you.
Thank you so much, panel, for those wonderful insights. I think I had a great time listening to all the very engaging questions that we got from the audience as well, and to all your responses. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our panel members for the very high energy and engaging talk. I would also like to thank all of you individually for your support leading up to the panel discussion and for being part of this wonderful journey. So thank you so much. We wish to see you back on our show again in the future. On behalf of our audience on peopleHum and all over the world dialed into this panel, thank you so very much. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.